Great. Thank you for joining us today on the property technology strategy and budgeting for 2024 multifamily. My name is Adam Chen. I am president of AmenityLinc and a part of the Brands Alliance that is a consortium of companies that are dedicated to delivering great service to the multifamily industry. That includes American Pool, Heartline Fitness, Live Unlimited, Century Fire, Planned Companies, Paul Davis, and CertaPro Painters. Before we dive into the meat of the presentation, I'd like to start off with, sharing that, our view of technology is unique among other vendor service providers, right? Property technology companies have the benefit of kind of cutting horizontally across some of these different vendor service verticals. And some of the property technology benefits that you might see in streamlined operations, reduction of costs, greater adherence to compliance and other mandates, a positive staff experience, so that you can retain and attract new staff. And then as well as adding additional value to residents and shareholders, all of those benefits can be realized through technology in all of these different vendor services. I'd like to kick things off as well with just a general statement that, the best technology is the technology that's actually used. I'm sure everyone on this call has been through some process or some technology that's promised all of these great things, right? But then you've never actually realized all those benefits, and you've kind of resigned yourself to just accepting, that's the best we're going to get out of it. Well, that's not really the case, right? Like, we want to make sure, and our thoughts of implementing our property technology is, what are the ways that we can ensure adoption, right? And I think one of the key things that we need to focus on here in 2023 and looking forward is a mobile first approach. There's a lot of incumbent softwares that are out there, that maybe are a little bit dated, a little bit antiquated. The reality of the world is more than 50% of search traffic now happens on mobile devices. And if you think about it, it shouldn't be surprising. Everyone has a computer in their pocket at all times. So it's natural to think that there's going to be more search, more web browsing, more discovery, more due diligence happening on mobile devices now than on desktop. So you also want technology to meet people where they are, right? And that's how you're going to ensure that adoption. So for all your properties, making sure that you have a mobile app, making sure that your staff has access to do things remotely and not just behind a desktop computer is key. The rest of this presentation today, we're going to take you through, a few different slides. We're going to focus a little bit on what the property technology ecosystem looks like today. What's the right order of operations to approach different technology initiatives? I am president of a software as a service or a SaaS company, and there's a couple different models or ways to think about, SaaS providers and how that can be additive to your businesses. There's also a process around requirement gathering, planning, and making decisions, right, when it comes to procurement of technology. We also must acknowledge the pace of change in the world. It's ever accelerating, and all of those things will, come together in what ultimately is a strategic budget that's looking over the long term. So first, what is the property technology ecosystem today? One way to think about it is, there's been a proliferation of property technology tools, I would say, over the past decade. It's definitely an industry that was, grown significantly during the days of, cheap capital. Now that things have, increased, the cost of capital, there's a lot of different solutions out there. There's a lot of those solutions overlap in functionality. But a good way to think about that is to bucket things into these 5 different categories. And I think what we're going to see, over time here is some consolidation in the industry. Certainly, M&A is going to go on the uptick here as we look to, there's a lot of those technology companies that, quite honestly, have been funded that aren't profitable today. So when you're looking across this ecosystem, a key thing to keep in mind is, is this solution, is this company going to be there for the long haul, right? And the reality is you're going to need property technology in these 5 different categories. Now, here's just a little bit more information on some of the different specific features that might roll up into each one of these categories. But this is ultimately a systems architecture type exercise, right? You need this, broad, view of your organization and how technology can be additive in all of these different areas, right? Will it help you provide some operational excellence and efficiencies at scale? Will it help deliver a better experience to your residents or your staff? Is there opportunity to automate certain things, right? So that our people, our most important asset, can focus more deeply on, the relationship building with the resident population, the core of their job. There's also obviously financial and risk analysis and different tools that can look at, micro and macro factors, right? And then finally, data and analytics. That's the key of all technology, is the ability to gather data and gain business insights and intelligence that will inform your decisions moving forward. They say data is now the new oil, right? So getting that first party data from your own buildings, from your own communities, right, and being able to aggregate that across a portfolio is huge, and that'll really help you, operate more effectively moving forward. There is an often quoted stat by McKinsey that 70% of enterprise change initiatives fail or fail in some way, right? That's a astounding stat to think about, right? So what we're going to talk about here is the order of operations to make sure that you're not a part of that 70%, right? And there's a very specific process that we need to follow here. There's an old business literature book called Good to Great that I'm a huge fan of and actually recently revisited. But they have this adage in there about getting the right people on the bus, right? And that's really your first step. And any executive team, any leadership team, you got to make sure you have the right people in your organization, right? That'll adopt this change, facilitate the change, right? They need to be able to execute, right? That might mean delaying, the kickoff of something. It might mean spending a little bit of time and budgeting for that time up front, right? To make sure that you have the right people. And that might seem like you're slowing things down, but really what that's going to do is set you up for success. It's good. And it's ultimately going to minimize the costs and additional frustrations down the line when you have to change, pivot, do something differently, redo something, right? That's what we want to avoid, because that's the most costly. The second thing, once we have the right people on the bus, is process. We need to make sure that we document standard operating procedures. And we need to make sure that we get the buy-in from all the different stakeholder groups that might be involved in a change initiative, right? We need to budget and train, for training costs, right? Materials development and the time it takes to then go out and train the different cohorts within your organization, right? There's also going to be, even if you hire outside companies, like mine and AmenityLinc, you still have internal costs to help maintain that. You still need some level of expertise and knowledge about this technology internally to ensure business continuity over the long haul, right? Only after you've documented and gotten the buy-in and got your standard operating procedures does it make sense to really start selecting technology. That's your platform, right? So people first, then process, then platform, right? People often get very enamored with the bells and whistles and a lot of new technology. And a lot of these technology companies do a great job in marketing, a lot of these, aspirational promises, right? Right. But that's all in a vacuum. You need to make sure that a particular technology works directly for your needs in your organization. And every property, every, management company, every owner operator is a little bit different. Right. So you first have to really look internally before you can start selecting technology. What works for a competitor might not be the best solution for you. So, of course, AmenityLinc is a software as a service provider, right? And there's certainly some trade-offs when thinking about how you might go and procure this or how you might partner with a SaaS company, right? I hear it all the time, every week, in almost every conversation, right? We all can acknowledge that technology is complex and it's getting more complex, right? So our desire is to find the easy button. Our brain is telling us, find that all-in-one solution, right? The reality of the world, though, is you cannot have a best-in-class tool and an all-in-one solution. They cannot coexist. There are trade-offs. So when you go and choose best in class, what's that allow you to do? It allows you to differentiate a particular service delivery, right? Maybe that's for your resident audience. Maybe that's for your staff audience, right? Um, but if you have very specialized needs, you almost have to go best in class. What you need to accept then is that there's going to be integration expenses because there's always going to be multiple tools in that world, and you're going to need to make sure they talk to each other, right? You need to understand what needs to be passed between each other for each system to work effectively, which means you're going to have some ongoing integration expenses that you need to consider, right? Maybe some of that is managed in-house, maybe it's out-of-house, maybe it's a hybrid of the two. Either way, you need to allocate budget to make sure that you can maintain those integrations. Alternatively, there are a lot of incumbent players in this industry, right, that do, say they offer an all-in-one solution. The reality, though, is that not all of their products can truly be best in class. They might have a couple, right, and that's those points of integration, right? But if you really want to differentiate something, go best in class. If you really want simplicity and the scale of your organization can't maintain those integration expenses, right, then maybe some of these more all-in-one solutions exist, but just temper your expectations because they're not going to deliver on every single need that you'll have. Okay. The other thing we constantly think about is this, in SaaS is, do you build, do you buy, right? In yesteryear, obviously, most technology was on premises, right? Which meant that you had high capital expenditures. You had to invest in a server room, in security, in additional power, right? And then the staff to maintain your networks and infrastructure, in addition to maybe the teams that configure the applications themselves, right? That's a high IT expense. The power of SaaS is now you can outsource a lot of that development and maintenance, right? So that allows you to then focus on your core business, which is managing properties, finding new assets and identifying those assets and serving your shareholders, right? It also allows you to, leverage the benefits of the whole industry as a whole, because a lot of these property technology tools work within specific verticals such as multifamily, but also cut across other real estate verticals. So a lot of them are able to aggregate some of these best practices and then bring them back to you, and you can benefit from some of that learning that you don't have to take on yourself, right? The key thing, though, in all of this, though, is even when you do outsource some of this through a SaaS provider, you still need some annual operating expenditure to maintain those things, right? As new features are released, you still need people that understand the product internally to then leverage and roll out, update those SOPs and roll out those new features. So there still needs to be maybe a product owner or some subject matter expert, right, on your side. So you can think about, while saving some costs in one area, you might need to spend some of that savings in another area just to make sure that you're managing your SaaS providers effectively. All right. One thing AmenityLinc is staying current with new trends, right? And we are seeing more and more Class A amenity-rich properties as kind of the bellwethers of a lot of portfolios, right? It helps build brands in a lot of ways, even if some of these Class A properties might have lower cap rates, right? So, but what we're basically trying to say too, though, is through technology, you can also get more ROI out of some of these amenities, but also the fact that residents are expecting these. There's been a lot of change over the past few years with COVID, hybrid work, live, work, play communities. That's not going to go away, right? And as you as a community being able to offer some of these additional amenities and benefits so that people can effectively work within their communities to live and enjoy their communities beyond just a place to sleep, right? You're going to have higher occupancy rates. You're going to have higher retention, right? And technology is what's going to make sure you get the most out of those additional investments that you've already made, So we've gone through people. We've gone through a little bit of process, and I want to hit on that a little bit more here, right? So Gartner, states that 59% of organizations that are fully successful in achieving their strategic objectives, they have clear responsibilities assigned, right? That's not just identifying the right people on the bus, but making sure they understand their role and their job, right? Clearly and definitively. right? That's how you build high-performing teams. So when that is then applied to, process, as we go into step 2 of that, what are some, artifacts that we can create or tools that we can use to help us through planning? After we've got the people on board, we now need to gather functional requirements. So these are the business owners. These are the, division owners, the folks that represent operations in a lot of ways, right? They need to articulate exactly what it is that you need, right? What is going to make the improvement better for operations, for staff, for growth potential, right? All those different areas we spoke about before. They need to articulate that. Only then can a subject matter expert, IT, in-house, out of house, whomever, take those functional requirements and document what are the technical needs? What are those integration points that we're going to need to make sure that this is successful? Are there specific variability even within a portfolio that we're going to need to consider? And you need to understand that so you make sure that you've staffed in some way the right expertise to execute against that, right? Then I would always recommend some decision-making committee structure or some formal process like an RFP process so that we try to level the playing field. I think bias is a very real thing in the world. And we all get very comfortable having, going through these due diligence processes with, our gut instincts. So we do need other people to challenge those views and create a diverse cross-section maybe of your organization that can weigh in on making some of these decisions. It shouldn't necessarily just reside with one person, right? And then a tool that you can use, with that committee is a weighted decision-making framework. Right. There might be in your organization greater needs on growth, and in other organizations, maybe a greater need on operational efficiency, right? You can't just look at your competitors and follow them, apples to apples. You really do need to look internally. So you need to weight those things that are most important to your organization. Now, we have a couple different templates that we use in our consulting engagements, which is the other side of our business, other than selling our SaaS software licenses. And I'm happy to share some of these templates through, an initial consultation if you follow up with us after the webinar today. One of those is a decision-making framework. We also employ what's called a RACI chart or a roles and responsibilities matrix, if you will, right, to help identify, the right people and skills within your organization. Now we need to talk about, adoption. And this is part of looking internally into your own organization and the people that make up that organization. But there's this great quote by Adam Chen. This has been said a multitude of different ways by other leaders in the world, but change has never been this fast and it will never be this slow again. All we're saying is that the world is changing and it's changing quicker and quicker every single day, right? Technology is enabling a lot of that growth, right? People get, so enamored with all this new AI and chat GPT and all the possibilities that could grow, right? And that kind of translates into this idea of mindset, right? And you need to understand what mindset your organization and your leaders embody, right? And if you haven't heard of this concept, look up Carol Dweck. She's a great academic and author that defined this concept. But put simply, a growth mindset doesn't fear change. They see opportunity in growth, right? And learning new things. And there's never an upper limit or a cap on what that growth might have, right? Alternatively, on a fixed mindset, these are the people that might fear change, or feel limited, that they're never going to be able to get better, right? And I don't believe in that, right? I think with given the right tools and given the right environment, right, everyone can feel comfortable and excited about potential future change and what that might mean, right? AI is not going to necessarily replace all of us. It's just going to allow us to do higher value things. And that's kind of embodying the growth mindset. But making sure your organization has that growth mindset and how do you foster that environment is very important, right? Because that type of environment is what's going to adopt some of these new tools, technologies, and the ways of doing things, right? I think the worst thing I hate to hear, I guess, in a lot of my engagements is, but that's the way we've always done it, right? That's a clear indication that maybe we're stuck, right? And that there needs to be some other activity before we start rolling out the actual technology platform itself. Okay. Well, now let's get into what we're all here for, and let's talk budgeting. Let's talk numbers a little bit and how to think about budgeting. So most of our key targets and audience and clients are mid-size enterprises. As Gartner defines it, that's 50 million to 1 billion in annual revenue. When you look across all the different industries and mid-size enterprises, average IT spending as a percentage of revenue floats around 5%. What I can tell you is that real estate significantly underinvests in IT and R&D relative to other industries. So how do we think about that? What do we do to change that, right? Now, this chart you've seen before in some previous webinars, but there's a couple different categories of things that might make up your budget, right? Rent, insurance and legal costs, utility costs, additional vendor services that we looked at previously, staffing, of course, right? And then there's the technology component. So we're going to do a deep dive here into technology just a little bit. Technology can really be thought of now. We need to segment that into maybe 4 different buckets, right? And this loosely aligns with some of the goals we started at the outset of this presentation. But does your technology help facilitate growth? Does it facilitate operational excellence? Does it deliver a resident experience? Or does it make you more adherent to compliance rules and regulations, right? All of the different technology that falls within your strategy, within your budget, right, should be mapped to one of these things. Now, here's 2 additional artifacts that I'm happy to share through a complimentary consultation with anyone on this call. Is a functional strategic planning document that then is a prerequisite to doing the technical requirement gathering, right? And through this process, we'll be able to really get granular on what the budget spend is, both today and moving forward into the future. Now, we take those same 4 categories of technology and we have to then slice it between what are our ongoing production costs for things that are live in the world today and driving operations and experience at our properties. And then there's also R&D. And that's the other thing that I think is often, overlooked and not thought about, or thought about in spurts. But this is part of what that growth mindset can help facilitate in a healthy organization. Do you have a culture where people are willing to explore and try out new things, right? I think that's really the only way to stay ahead of your competition in this industry, right? To constantly be experimenting and looking at the world in new ways and seeing in what ways you can gain a competitive advantage, right? That's going to be key. Competitive advantage to attract new residents, to attract new staff, to attract new capital, right, from different investors, right? We need to differentiate our companies, right? And I think we're in a unique time because deal flow has slowed down with that increased cost of capital, where now we have some, maybe space, and time to spend some time thinking about how we build an R&D program or try out some new things at a couple of properties, so that when deal flow increases again, and a lot of projects are now funded in the future, right? Maybe we have a new model of how we start, right? How we get this thing integrated and live through lease up. So the key thing to think about here, this is an example of an allocation, but it's not, I'm going to spend in profitable growth 1 year and forego operational excellence. We should have some level of investment in technology every year across these 4 areas. And then there should also be some R&D work and some people empowered to explore new ways of doing things, because we are constantly innovating in the technology field. Again, it's always increasing. So you need to keep up to date with what those trends are. And this is how you do it, by allocating time, people, and budget dollars towards this exploration. We're happy to, go into a little bit more detail on how we individually, on how we kind of help people through the budgeting process and how to think about technology, not just for 2024, but really what amounts to a, medium and long-term plan. That's the other side of our business. We certainly sell lifestyle management software, our mobile apps. We help streamline property management and deliver experiences. But my background, I like to take an objective approach and make sure that you're making the right decision. The best client is the client that has software that actually works for them. And I don't want to force anyone to make a decision that's not going to work to their benefit. So we do take a consultative approach in how we go about things. I'm happy to share all the artifacts and documents that we use in our planning. and also happy to now take any questions that the audience may have. Thank you so much.